Okay, so it's been a while, I know. Many reasons for that, which you can all read in the description down below for a longer version, but TLDR, I needed to take care of my health a bit more. I wasn't all that interested in the last format anyway, to begin with, and I also wanted to take some time to play some other games that I haven't had the time to play before, like Magic the Gathering. It's a phenomenal game, I can only recommend. I will probably make a video on that at a later point. And I also recently, or maybe not as recently now anymore, almost a year ago, I mean, that's not really recently, right? I started a new Dungeons & Dragons campaign with a good friend of mine who's the Dungeon Master in this campaign, and it's been a blast so far. So a lot of things have happened. Of course, the videos have been on the hold for this period of time. I guess it's okay, I just took a bit of time for myself, which is, it's totally fine, but I just wanted to let you guys know. But Banlist has dropped just about a week ago, and the point in time at which it dropped was pretty interesting. But more importantly, I think the changes that they chose to make are pretty much very discuss-worthy, right? That's what we do on this channel, so let's take a closer look at the ban list. They banned both LP and Trident, which in my opinion both make sense. Maybe LP was the more obvious hit, but we saw at the LCS the past weekend that Trident gives both Pure Zodiac and Tri-Brigade Zodiac a very strong turn 1 board. I believe if nothing would have happened to the Zodiac deck, it probably would have reigned the format entirely. But you could also say that Zeus maybe is the card that is actually the broken one and should be limited, and there is probably a case to be made with that, but I like the way that they go, in which they make Zodiac a purely go-in second deck. Sounds reasonable to me. Now, Tri-Brigade Zodiac is still a thing. They can still use the Zodiac engine to extend their plays and make Zeus going second, but we'll have to see how that is actually going to turn out in practice. They limited a bunch of cards, namely Miscellaneousaurus, the Performapal Joker, Striker Dragon, Stalio, and Engage, with 2 of these cards coming from 3 to 1, and Stalio, Engage, and the Joker coming from 0 to 1. While I think that Miscellaneousaurus and Joker are not going to play huge factors in the upcoming format, the other cards probably will. So, Miscellaneousaurus, I support them hitting Dino. I think Miscellaneousaurus is an incredibly unfair card, but the deck hasn't seen any play recently, I believe, in the format, so it's interesting that they choose to hit it now, but I'm all for that. Joker is not going to play a huge role because Pendulums without Electromite are still probably going to do nothing. Striker Dragon is a decent hit in my opinion. The Dragon Link deck would have been just even better in their follow-up than they already still are with Striker Dragon at 3. So I'm all for that. Decent hit, but of course the very, very interesting cards, Stalio and Engage, because both Salamangreat and especially Sky Striker have been fan favorite decks for the past years at this point. So it's going to be interesting to see how these changes are gonna affect the deck or even the entire format, right? So yeah, I think a reasonable approach to talk about this format is to talk about the decks individually, separately, and see what the changes will, bring for them, and then sort of resume the whole thing after that. So let's do that. Usually I'm not a huge fan of making tier lists, but I feel like it puts everything sort of into perspective, makes it proportionally easy for me to tell which decks I think are going to be good in the format. Generally, I think this can only make you look bad, right? You will say one deck is going to be good, then things are going to turn out differently. But this is my take on it. We're going to start with the big elephant in the room, which is obviously Sky Striker. Sky Striker gets back Engage, which if I imagine the current Sky Striker with just an Engage in addition to their deck, I think it's not going to be a bad deck. Engage is obviously the powerhouse of this deck, has always been. This card at 3 is incredibly broken, but Shaddoll wasn't in the format in the way it is right now back in the day, right? They didn't have Schism, they didn't have Ariel, they didn't have Abkalon, and I feel like Shaddoll has an incredible matchup versus Sky Striker. So I feel like Sky Striker is probably going to be one of these decks where it's like, if a lot of people in the format decide to play Sky Striker, the deck is going to get worse because more people are going to be on Shaddoll, and other just texted out the deck efficiently, DD Crow for example. And the less people are playing Sky Striker, the better it can be, because the deck inherently is very strong. It can generate advantages super easily. Engage is a broken card that is not once per turn. Mine is still a thing. If people don't respect it, this deck can thrive off that. So I feel like this deck is probably good at tier 2, right? It's not going to be one of the decks, I would say, to beat. It's not the deck to beat, but it can be sort of a counter pick, I would say. Secondly, we have Salamangreat. They got back Stalio, so this is going to be interesting to see how this deck is going to turn out. I got to be honest in saying that I never really played the Salamangreat deck, so I can't give a qualified comment on whether or not Stalio makes a huge difference. But from what I've seen from other YouTubers, players, professional players, etc., Stalio doesn't really make the biggest difference for the deck, because now you play more rank 3 extenders to get out Stalio, but then if your Stalio gets hand trapped, maybe you're a bit more vulnerable to that, to hand traps. So it's going to be iffy, right? I don't know if this is going to make the biggest difference. To me personally, I feel like Salamangreat right now is very irrelevant. Also has a bad matchup versus the Shadol deck, and is inherently worse than the Sky Striker deck. So that's why I would probably put it at Rogue. Let me know in the comments. Let me know your opinion. I do personally think it's going to be in the Rogue category, and it's going to see a little bit of play at the beginning of the format, but then people are going to realize, oh, Stalio is actually not a huge card anymore. So yeah, it locks you into fire. I don't know. Yeah, this used to be incredibly good versus Colossus, of course, but now you don't really have monsters that you have to bounce back anymore like a Colossus. Joker, this deck is going to be irrelevant for sure. I feel like Pendulums are just not going to do anything without Electromite. They really need this very strong extender, and Pendulums historically have the problem of going second. I feel like Pendulum not going to do a whole lot in the upcoming format. Let's talk about Dragon Link. This is not Dragon Maid. I didn't really have a better picture for you now, but this is the old Dragon Link deck, right? Striker Dragon to 1 takes away a lot from the grind game of this deck. Also, it takes away from the combos, because in the past, you usually use 2 Striker Dragon in your first combo, and then you would make a third one on your follow-up turn. Now without LP, of course, you maybe don't even need the second Striker Dragon. I haven't really looked into the Dragon Link combos myself as in depth, but I know that now the Dragoonity engine is going to be played more. I know that Atom is now the new LP sort of, or can be played. But I feel like this deck loses, first of all, loses more to high impact hand traps, I would say. It isn't as consistent anymore, and it isn't as good in making extremely efficient plays with very little resources, right? You need more cards to start your plays. You need more cards to extend your plays, even though the extenders themselves are the same, but that just goes to show how strong these extra deck cards are, right? So I feel like this is still going to be very strong. I feel like it's going to be in the tier 2 category. I would, if there was a 1.5, but I don't like these sort of tier 1.5. I would rather just put it at tier 2. With the potential to go into tier 1 depending on how the format shapes. I feel like this deck can put out incredibly strong boards, but it's just going to be difficult for the deck to see how well it can extend through these hand traps that are going to be played. It also depends on which deck is going to be, in general, it just depends on which deck is going to be the format defining deck, right? Because which is the deck to beat? Probably Drytron, you would say, right? But maybe if the Shadol deck gets more popular, then potentially that. So depending on which hand traps are going to be played to address the main combo or main control deck in the format, these decks can thrive, right? Now, Tri-Brigade loses Trident, which, like I said, is not the biggest problem for the deck. I feel like this is going to be a tier 1 deck simply because the combos are not as different. You still have the new Tri-Brigade monster, the Rampager, which is insane. Revolt is an insane card. This deck gives you follow-up every single turn. It can extend to a certain degree with Barrage, and it can still extend very well. So I don't know. I feel like this deck didn't really lose a whole lot by losing Trident. Of course, yeah, 1 less interruption sometimes, depending on your hand. But all in all, I don't really see this suffering so much. So Tri-Brigade's still going to be a tier 1 deck for me. And then we just have a bunch of decks here that didn't really see any direct changes, but they are going to be placed on the tier list differently because, of course, LP, Striker Dragon, all these hits. So Virtual World we've seen at the PPG tournament can do well in this format. I still think it's a tier 2 deck, just because if people are prepared for this deck, it's not going to be as prevalent, I would say. I know the basic combos, but I also know that this deck can lose pretty easily to hand traps, and even the end board is not an end board where you would say, oh, it's unbeatable with going second cards, right? So I think this is still, it's an okay deck, it's an okay combo deck, but is it going to be the best? I doubt it. At Ignister, Pack showed that this deck has potential in the upcoming format as well. I feel like the more people are going to figure out the format, this deck can thrive from it because it can play a lot of non-engine cards to stop the opponent. So in my opinion, this is also like one of these tier 1.5/tier 2 decks, even though I'd probably put Dragon Link above Ad Ignister for now. And this is more of a feeling, of course. I'm just judging from my feeling, from what I think could happen. This, of course, isn't set in stone in any single way. But the Adignister deck, you know, it has a Taos-esque monster. It can do some neat stuff. It can OTK easily with access code. It can extend well with the field spell. It is still one of these decks that can lose to one hand trap. You have a lot of decks in the format that with one normal summon, they can do a lot, but it depends on whether or not that a normal summon gets hand trapped. The Invoke deck, it used to be the Zodiac deck, now the Adignister deck. So one of the things that is so good about the Dragonlink deck, for example, is that it can extend further after the normal summon being stopped usually. I would continue with Prankits here. Prankits is a solid tier 2 deck in my opinion. Nothing really changed about this deck, right? We have seen all these things that this deck can do, and, you know, here and there it gets its tops, but I think there's not too much to talk about here. The Invoke Shaddoll deck, I would say, is tier 1 now, just because the Striker matchup is so good. Striker is going to be a popular deck in the new format. It didn't really see any hits on the Banlist. So the Invoke Shaddoll Dogmatica deck was even one of the better decks in the past format. I think people just got a bit bored of it, so they didn't play it anymore, similar to the Dino deck. Against all the suboptimal boards, this format, a Shaddoll Fusion is just so good. So Drytron is going to be tier 1 for sure, probably going to be the deck to beat this format. It is the combo deck, of course, of the format. But also Drytron, it's funny, right? Because as soon as Drytron sees more play, people are going to start playing Cycle Reader, and Cycle Reader is an amazing card versus Drytron, which blows them out completely. And then even control decks can win versus Drytron simply because of that card. So it's going to be interesting. I think the dynamics of this format are going to change every week from what I can expect. I think this is one of the safe things I can say about this format, is that the dynamics are going to change every week. It will always depend on what decks are people currently playing. So then I have to adapt to these decks and play what I think is good against these. So if you see a lot of people play Drytron, just side in these Drolls, Cycle Readers, Crows, etc. and just get done with this deck, and this deck can't really do anything about it unless they open Orange Herald with Eva or something. And then the dynamic is going to change, right? People are going to be scared to play Drytron because they know Cycle Readers in the format, so they're going to stop playing maybe another deck. And then this deck has also counters to it. So I feel like none of these decks is strong enough to say that they are going to be invulnerable to interruption. So yeah, this format is probably going to have a nice dynamic to it. Then any Eldritch variant I feel like are still in the Rogue tier. Eldritch, I don't really know why I put this in here. I feel like it's always the question, right? Eldritch being the standard control deck, maybe not anymore with Sky Striker coming into the format, but I feel like this can, you know, sometimes take maybe a top here and there. It was the same with Subterror and these kind of decks, right? Where sometimes they can perform really well, but they're not the type of decks where people are just not going to be prepared for them, so they're going to lose to it eventually. It's been quite a long video. I had a lot of fun ranking or rating these kind of decks for the upcoming format. This is just what I think. It doesn't have to be true at all. It's just what I like, out of my feeling, out of my gut, what I would say could be not too bad in the upcoming format. But what do you think? I would be very, very interested in knowing what the community currently says about this format. Do you like Engage being unbanned? Do you like Stalio being unbanned? Do you think maybe Stalio is going to do a bit more than I would say, or I don't really do the card justice or the deck? Let me know all of these things in the comment section down below. Like I said, this was a very fun video to me. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed doing it. Other than that, this leaves me with only one thing to say, which is I hope you guys loved it, and I'll see you in the next video.